Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So recently we talked about the 25th Amendment, and I got some questions around what that is. So let's take a look at it real quick. We'll jump into to what that is. The 25th Amendment deals specifically with presidential succession and disability. So what's concerning right now in America is we have a vice president that no one wants. And Kamala Harris has been in the vice president role for the last 3 years. But the suggestion is we haven't gone after the 25th Amendment to push her succession because people think she's worse than Biden and no one wants her in that capacity. However, she herself should have pushed for this because if the president hasn't met with his cabinet in 9 months, then he's not doing the job. So the suggestion should be that she's doing the job since she's an elected official. But if she's not, then who is, right? Some people say his community college PhD wife is doing it. I don't know. I'm not there. I have no clue. And possibly the cabinet is running on its own. So each one of those heads of the different sections is running their own for the time being without input from the president. That's what's suggested from this when people don't meet with the cabinet for 10 months. So the 25th Amendment of the United States Constitution deals with presidential succession and disability. It clarifies that the vice president becomes president if the president dies, resigns, or is removed from office through impeachment. At this point, Biden should have been impeached. He can't finish his sentences, and he calls people by the wrong names. He calls countries by the wrong names and calls wars by the wrong names. If he's doing that, he cannot keep the finite things correct, okay? If you think about finance, you think about a spreadsheet, you have to know the debts and the credits, right? You have to be able to balance the spreadsheet. This guy deals with so much on a daily basis that there's no way he can keep any of that straight with what we're seeing publicly. So basically, the 25th Amendment establishes how a vacancy in the office of the vice president can be filled. It also provides a temporary transfer of the president's powers and duties to the vice president, either on the initiative of the president alone or the initiative of the vice president together with the majority of the president's cabinet. So here's the point when I said something about treason earlier. The president's cabinet knows the capacity he has and knows that he hasn't been participating. So to keep that power on themselves, to run what they do themselves, they have not pushed for this. This and the vice president, the cabinet and the vice president should have acted on this, okay? So it's an act of treason that are not, because we have a vacant presidency that has powers filling over these people that are not theirs. It should be with the role of the president. In either case, the vice president becomes an acting president until the presidential powers and duties can be returned to the president. The amendment was submitted to the states July 6, 1965 by the 89th Congress and was adopted February 10, 1967. The day that the requisite number of states, which is 38, had ratified it. So when we talk about presidential succession, Section 1 of this clarifies that the enumerated situations the vice president becomes president instead of merely assuming the powers and duties of the presidency as the acting president. It operates automatically. There's no ceremony or anything else. Basically, they say the person's unfit, and the vice president then becomes president. It operates automatically without needing to be explicitly invoked. Section 2 says the vice presidential vacancy. Section 2 provides a mechanism for filling the vacancy of the vice president. Before the 25th Amendment, the vice presidential vacancy continued until a new vice president took office at the start of the next presidential term. The vice presidency has become vacant several times due to death, resignation, and succession to the presidency, and these vacancies had often lasted several years, which puts the country at risk because if something happens to the president, the vice president should be able to take care of that role. Section 3 allows for the voluntary transfer of presidential authority to the vice president, for an example, in anticipation of a medical procedure by the president declaring in writing to be unstable to discharge the powers of the duty of the presidency. The vice president then assumes those powers and duties as acting president. The vice president does not become the president, and the president remains in office, although without authority for that period of time. The president regains those powers and duties upon declaring in writing to again be able to discharge them. This is appropriate because this is the elected official to run the country. When you have an elected official to run the country and a vice president who's also an elected official to run the country, this is how you get what you're paying for there. One takes care of the other, and it's a valid successionary process, so the country is taken care of. That's the point of American politics. Now we're no longer looking out for the country, we're looking out for politicians, which is nonsensical. So the declaration of the vice president and cabinet members of the president's inability, this should be what's happening now, but it hasn't. It's under Section 4, and it says, whenever the vice president and majority of either of the principal officers of the executive departments or such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives to their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. That should have nothing to do with Republican. It should have nothing to do with the Democrat. If the president cannot do what the president is responsible to do, this should be enacted. If a president hasn't met with his Congress in 9 months, this should be enacted. They're not doing their jobs. The vice president's not doing her job by not making this happen, which is a blunder on her part, because imagine, had she taken this situation, she possibly could be herself the next president. But by not doing this and playing party politics and not trying to make the president look bad, now they're talking about possibly replacing him, and her name is not coming up. So she's possibly missed out on her opportunity to be the president of the United States by fulfilling his duties for the rest of his term, and then herself being the one that we may possibly elect based on how she did the job. But since she was playing party politics and didn't do what was appropriate, now her Democratic Party is not even naming her name as a possible replacement for him should they not choose him to be their presidential candidate. So the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president should the declaration by the vice president and cabinet members say the president is unable to continue to do the job that they're in. Thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives has written a declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office, unless the vice president and the majority of either of the principal officers of the executive department or such other bodies such as Congress may by law provide or transmit within 4 days to the president pro tempore of the Senate and Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. Thereupon Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for the purpose, if not in session, if the Congress within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after the Congress is required to assemble, determines by a 2/3 vote of both houses that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the powers and duties of his office. So that talks about Section 4, when you basically say the president is unable, and the people that are supposed to do that, the people that have the appropriate responsibility to do that, is the president's cabinet and his vice president. And if those two people aren't doing it, then they're the ones that are committing treason, because they're putting the country at risk by letting a president who can't even finish his sentences stay in power. Okay, so Section 4 addresses the case of the president who is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the presidency, but cannot or does not execute the voluntary declaration contemplated by Section 3. So here's the point about that. It's the president's responsibility to voluntarily do that if he knows his ability is limited. When you have a lifetime politician like you do right now that's never been effective, he's not ever going to declare himself ineffective. You get what I'm saying? So the country is at risk. The presidency is at risk, and the vice president is an embarrassment because I don't even want her to be in the role, which is quite pathetic. When you look at this amendment, it is to protect the country from a vacant spot of the presidency. It is to allow the power to fall down the chain of command, because the vice president should be knowing what the president's dealing with and what the president has had brought to him. And also the cabinet should know how to work with the vice president, because they should be in that room when the cabinet meets with the president. So what it does, it just creates a succession plan that makes sense, a congruency of understanding that makes sense, so the country doesn't miss a beat because of a politician. Here's the point. If this is not the point in time where this is appropriate, then what is? Okay, if we are so divided around politicians that our law, our constitutional law, the law of the land is not the law for those people, then what are we doing? The Constitution is the law of the land. The power comes from the people. The government is granted power by the people through the Constitution. So the fact that this is not being followed is against the law. It's against the law. I'm Ben. If you like subject matter such as this, please like, please subscribe. Be good.